I'd like to introduce you to Abbey Hauser. Abbey's our keynote speaker, which we have not done in the past, but Abbey spoke at the NIH about the teen to adult transition. And I was just so moved by her grace and her journey, how, she's tackling this now as a young adult. And Abbey comes from the Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome space. Her rare disease work began with her blog, Owning My Story. Her work was expanded to being a young adult representative of Rare with EveryLife Foundation, representing at Capitol Hill on Rare Disease Week, serving on Team Telomere's own board of directors, and much more. We're really grateful that Abbey could be here and her impactful work, and we look forward to hearing from her today, and you'll hear from her on how to engage in U.S. policy and how critical that is in the rare disease space. So with that, I welcome Abbey Hauser.
So like Katie said, I'm a rare disease patient, and I gave this same talk at the NIH Rare Disease Day in February. I was asked to share my story on a topic relating to the transition between pediatric and adult health care in more of a storytelling format. So the gist of this is related to my rare disease, but a little bit of it connects back to yours, and I edited it a little bit to connect to your community because we had a recent really good community chat with Dr. Olson for the young adults in the TBD space, and I know that you guys are in really good hands here with that transition. So like Katie said, a little bit about me. I added this slide from the other presentation, but I always say that there's three parts to me. There's the me that is everything else, the hobbies, the passions, the things that I enjoy, being outside, hiking, sports. There's the me that's the patient, and then there's the me that's the professional advocate that advocates on Capitol Hill and joins rare disease nonprofits and engages with the community. And all of these sort of come together to relate to how my story interacts with everything that I do. Now, my first memory of my rare disease is one filled with fear and uncertainty. I was 6 years old in these photos, and I had just dislocated my knee while playing with toys in my bed. You'd think the pain would be the memory that I hold on to, but instead fear dominates. Because I was in my house alone. 1 second I was playing, and the next I shifted my leg, felt my kneecap slide out of place, and froze, fear gripping me. My parents, siblings, and many neighbors were all outside in our yard having a garage sale. A seemingly simple, innocent action of when I asked to go inside to play because I was too hot quickly turned into something so much more. Something that I know many rare disease patients and families can relate to. And for whatever reason, on this day, I vividly remember this internal pep talk I was giving my 6-year-old self, telling me not to panic. And using the language that I have today, I know that my knee must have been sliding out of place prior to this moment. Because for whatever reason, I remember thinking that if I just stayed calm, it would move back into place, I could move again, and I could go about my day. And I'd clearly gotten that idea from some past situation because no 6-year-old thinks that without reason. But I didn't have the language to explain what was happening to my parents before this moment. But eventually on that day, the feeling did not pass, and the pain only intensified. My little kid pep talk no longer worked, and I panicked. I remember crying and yelling for help, but nobody came. I couldn't move, my knee hurt in a way that words couldn't describe, and I didn't know what was happening to me, and I was alone. And thus began what I call the official start to my rare disease journey. And unfortunately, it would not be the last time that I felt uncertainty or fear in relation to my medical care and eventual diagnosis of classical Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome. Now that day, back in 2001, I will never know how long I was crying for help for, but eventually a neighbor walked into our house and heard me. After that, she came upstairs, and more people and neighbors were involved with carrying me out to the car than my shy little kid heart would have ever wanted. And then even more people were involved in my care at the hospital. That day, I quickly learned I was not the captain of this ship. And now, when I was thinking about what parts of my story I wanted to talk about in relation to my transition of care, this reference to becoming the captain of the ship kept coming back to me. Now, I'm from Minnesota, so a nautical reference for rare disease felt natural to me because I grew up on and around water my entire life. I even was a coxswain on the University of Minnesota rowing team, where I spent 4 years of my life almost twice a day on the Mississippi River. So all this to say is, I just really like boats, which eventually led me to arriving in San Diego last September, and I had found myself with one extra day in town after a rare disease conference, and I ended up visiting the USS Midway Museum in San Diego. Pardon the one hand. This museum is a restored naval aircraft carrier that you can walk through and tour. On this tour, I came across one of many what they call ready rooms that are pictured here, and they're used for pre- and post-flight briefs for the entire team. Likely because I had just come from a rare disease conference, I don't know why, but I immediately saw these chairs with their labeled names, and I thought, I wonder what it would be like if everyone involved in my rare disease care could gather together and I could hold a meeting. I figured so much more would get done if I could coordinate my care in this way. Which then, because I'm a writer and my mind goes to story immediately, I thought about how perfect this metaphor is for the transition of medical care from pediatrics to adulthood. And I think of it like this. The rare disease you or your child has is the boat. All of the people involved in their care, like their primary care physicians, their specialists, nurses, PAs, OT, PT, insurance networks, educators, employers, caregivers, researchers, and so many more, all have different roles on this boat. They are in charge of keeping the boat functioning, floating, and ideally thriving. And as a kid, at the helm of this operation is your parents. They are the captain. The kid is the owner of the boat, but they are not in charge. And their role can vary. Some kids might be the second in command, while others might be a standard sailor, and others still are just passengers. However, in a lot of medical systems, the moment you turn 18, 21, or 26, whatever it might be for your organization, in the eyes of these institutions, and legally, you suddenly become the captain. Whether you want the role or not, it is yours. Yet this transition works better for some than others, because we can all imagine that the transition from second in command to captain is so much easier than transitioning from passenger to captain. Where you sit in this chain of command as a kid will influence your outcomes when you eventually become the captain as an adult. And now circling back to my story, I was diagnosed about a year after this picture was taken. It took us a very short single year for my diagnostic odyssey, which is very uncommon in my disease. And to put it politely, my rare disease boat was very inefficiently run my entire childhood. There is no one specialist who coordinates care for CEDS, and I lived about 45 minutes away from my pediatrician because we couldn't find one knowledgeable in my condition after we moved away. So because of this, we didn't see him often, and my care was spread throughout 4 hospital systems in the Twin Cities. The chain of command was confusing, and while we managed to keep my boat afloat, we definitely did not keep it thriving, and it was not smooth sailing. Fast forward 12 years, and we land ourselves here. And I love the synchronicity of these 2 photos because 6 days after I turned 18, I had surgery on the same knee that started this entire rare disease journey. And unfortunately, this day was filled with almost the same amount of fear and uncertainty. All of the appointments leading up to that surgery, my parents were the ones signing the paperwork and remaining in charge. I was involved in the decision-making because I was second in command because that's where I wanted to be, not because that's where my parents put me. But nothing was discussed about the changes that my age would bring. My doctor did not mention what would happen in the hospital system when they registered that I was 18 and no longer a child, and he was a pediatric doctor. Nothing was discussed. So when I showed up as a very fresh 18-year-old, I, all of a sudden, was tasked with signing my very first consent form for surgery 6 days after I turned 18. I was in charge of more of my care and even had the computer system that we tried hard to not kick me out put me on the adult wing and not the pediatric floor, which caused more chaos immediately after surgery because no one could figure out where I was kept. All because of 6 days. I became the captain officially at one of the most vulnerable times we have as humans, which is right before going to surgery. And I was not ready. This was not how the transition should have gone. However, during my surgery recovery time, because I am who I am, and I like to be prepared and educated, I took it upon myself to be the best captain that I could be. I was taking over a ship filled with chaos in my ranks, and I wanted order. So I used my fresh adult legal powers to request all of my childhood medical records from 4 hospital systems and started gathering and organizing it all to fully understand what had happened to me through infancy through age 18. But within this chaos, it was naturally rocky. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know how to decide how to pick an adult doctor. Classical EDS affects many body systems, so I've had many specialists involved in my care over the years, some more frequently than others, so no one was consistently coordinating any of my care. My parents and I were doing it all. So my transition to adult care thus consisted of the method that I recommend no one do, and that is where I waited until a symptom got very bad. Then I Googled a doctor in that specific area. I scheduled an appointment with them, and I built my entire team that way. I blindly was picking doctors and hoping for the best, and I think anyone that has been to a doctor that is not great in their past can realize that this probably didn't go well for every doctor that I saw. It meant a lot. I was explaining my condition a lot. There was no treatment available for my condition. There's no treatment protocol. There's no standards of care. So most doctors just didn't even know what to start with. And a lot of times they said I was too complex and pushed me on to a colleague. So it became a game of referrals. And that's how my adult healthcare system was entirely built. But during this time, it meant I experienced a lot of pain because I was waiting for something to happen instead of proactively doing something about it. And because of this, things slipped through the cracks, but I was just a fresh adult doing my best. And unfortunately, this is how a lot of young patients' transitions go in the rare disease space. And I really hope that as we continue to move these dialogues forward, and I know we're discussing them a lot in the TBD space, and that really excites me, the more we discuss these and the more we get clinics and doctors coordinating this care and engaging together, we can really help people move forward with their transition effectively and not have to go through the pain that slips through the cracks in that transition. And I wish I had all the answers. I wish I was standing up here today and was like, I've solved it, I've fixed everything about the transition of care, we're gonna crack it open today. But I don't. Because when I became the captain, I know what saved me was my personality and my innate drive. And I got lucky that that's who I am. That's by no choice of my own. And I firmly believe that a patient's personality should not be the thing that determines their outcomes. So as we continue moving these discussion points forward, there are a few things that I know would have helped me in my transition. And I also know that these are things that are happening a lot in your community already. But a few ideas: educating your child in their own condition at age-appropriate levels as you move throughout the lifespan. There's different things that you can add. When I was a kid, we only said the name of my disease in doctor's offices. We never spoke it outside of the medical setting. So I did not really understand what I had. I didn't understand how it affected me until I got older and went to Google by myself. And that is not how any kid should learn about their disease. And start the process early. Let your kid be your first mate. Let them be second in command. They can guide things. You can guide the program and do the legal things, but especially as they get older, they can be that second in command so that transition goes really well when they become 18, 21, 26, whatever it is for your age. And also be prepared for what changes when they turn 18. It might not be 18 at your clinic. It might be 21. It might be 26. It might be 30. It depends on what your clinic is and what your protocols are. But asking about them and knowing what changes and who signs what papers. I didn't know what I was doing signing away a surgery consent form at 18. I was not prepared for that. So just knowing like what would have happened would have prepared me a lot better. If you're a pediatric provider, knowing options of adult providers, or even just being willing to work as their partner in this transition would make all the difference. I don't think any of my pediatric providers had great options. I think half the referrals I got from pediatric providers were to really bad adult providers because they didn't have a good name, so they just kind of picked one. So knowing that and working together as a partner in that transition is what's going to make all the difference. Parents, this one gets hard, but follow your child's leadership style once they take over as captain. Following their leadership style will let you become potentially second in command instead of being delegated back to passenger. Personally, I delegated my parents back to passenger level because that was right for me. But knowing that if my parents would have followed my leadership style and the way that I wanted my care coordinated, I would have let them have a more involved aspect in my care as I got older. So being able to follow that from a young age is going to help figure out where you end up in this chain of command once your child becomes an adult. And now Dr. Olson talked recently, like I said, about the importance of the medical home and TBDs during a recent community chat. And there were some really good tips for transitioning care and how to decide when it happens, what specialists you transition first, how to find your new medical home, and things like that. So I know that there are a lot of really good resources here in the community, and I really am excited just by knowing that. That community chat alone had me very excited for what your community is doing and the support that you have for this transition. And lastly, remember that there is no right way to transition healthcare, but there are plenty of unhelpful ways that can have lasting negative effects for patients. Becoming the captain of your rare disease boat doesn't need to be an experience filled with fear and uncertainty, like mine was. We can help the kids of our future become strong leaders in their care, and it's discussions like these that we have today and keeping this in the forefront of our minds that are going to make that happen. Thank you.